everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my December wrap-up. So wrapping up December, before I can get into wrapping up 2021 as a whole, we gotta talk about December. So in December, my reading did not really go as planned. However, when does it ever? I didn't get through as many books as I was planning to, but I still read 6 books, which is a good amount. I just had big plans for the month. Some things took me a little bit longer to get through than I was anticipating. Yeah, and so overall I liked a lot of the books that I was reading, so in that way it went well. It just didn't quite go as planned as to what books I read or how many I got to. But I also had 3 DNFs, so I'll show you what those 3 are. So my 3 DNFs in December were my reread of The Rune Lords by David Farland, The Tree of Ages by Sarah C. Rothel, and The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reed. So I will be talking about those in my winter DNFs video, which will come out in March. So if you want to know more about why I DNF'd those, I will be talking about them in that video. All right, now on to the 6 books that I did finish in December. The first book that I finished was Transformed: The Perils of the Frog Prince by Megan Morrison. This is the 3rd and final book in the Time trilogy, which is a middle grade fantasy series that are all retellings of different fairy tales, but each book also covers larger thematic topics in them that are not, it's not just purely a retelling. There's always these larger thematic elements, which is one of the reasons that I particularly enjoy this series. I kind of have been putting off reading this book because the first 2 I read a couple years ago, really enjoyed them, but I listened to them as audiobooks. I tend to read middle grade as audiobooks because I just kind of enjoy them better that way. But there isn't an audiobook for this one, so I just sort of put it off, decided to finally get to it, and I'm really glad that I did because I really enjoyed this. This series, I feel always surprises me. It always does more than I expect it to. But I should explain what this book is about. So as you can probably surmise from the title, this is a retelling of The Frog Prince. And in this, we are following Syra, who is the prince, and he is in frog form. At the very beginning, we see kind of how he got into that state, but then after that, he has been living as a frog for quite a while. He actually showed up in some of the previous books as a frog, and we didn't really know who he was, but now we get to follow his perspective and see how this ended up happening. And it ends up happening because he is a prince. He is very shallow and self-centered and selfish and mean in a lot of cases, and to get back at somebody who does not deserve his ire or cruelty in any way, because he is certainly in the wrong, but he does not believe he is. He makes a wish that goes awry and ends up turning him into a frog. And so he's been living as a frog, I think for a year or something. And in his country, there are elections going on when suddenly this sickness starts appearing, and they don't know where it's coming from at first. They think that it is coming from the oats, and so it becomes one of the themes in this is kind of about food safety, but there are also other politics that are going on with it, and so it turns out that Syra, in his frog form, is one of the few people who's really able to figure out what is going on with this sickness, because he can kind of go in places that nobody else can, because no one suspects a frog, so he can just kind of show up places and, he can learn people's secrets. The only problem is then he cannot communicate that back to anybody because he's a frog. So we're following him as he is trying to solve this mystery, as well as some other tangential or connected mysteries. And then trying to figure out, once he figures it out, how to communicate that back, and also him struggling internally with like him like growing as a person because he does, you know, has been turned into a frog because he was so selfish and horrible, and finding out like has living as a frog made him a better person to the point where he could be turned back into a person. But as I said, I really enjoyed this, and I really like this world, and I always enjoy these like, you know, larger themes that she incorporates, and I said it just kind of like always does more than I expected to. So I had a really fun time reading this. I gave this 4 stars. All right, then the next book that I finished was The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Dimeline. This is a standalone YA dystopian about a future in which there is a, I don't know if it's a plague or like a sickness of some kind, but for some reason people in North America stop being able to dream. And when they stop being able to dream, eventually they die. However, the indigenous people of North America still have the ability to dream, and everyone else has kind of tried to figure out like why that is, and they've determined that it has something to do with the, like there's something in the bone marrow of indigenous people which can help like cure this like disease where you stop dreaming. And so now the indigenous people are being like hunted down for their bone marrow. And so we're following this boy as he is trying to evade capture. He starts out, you know, with his family, but as he goes, you know, his father disappears, then his mother, then his brother, and then he's on his own. Eventually he finds another group of people to join, and it's about them kind of trying to make their way to safety, avoiding capture, people they encounter along the way, different people who seem friendly at first and then end up, you know, turning against them, all kinds of perils along the way. And I thought this was really good. I haven't read like a dystopian in a while, but this is very, I think, unlike a lot of other YA dystopian that I have read. There is definitely like this feeling of anxiety as you're following these characters, but they also have these real like connections and community as they go. And you know, as you're following our main character and the group of people he's traveling with, they're learning more about their culture and hearing, you know, stories. One of the things that was interesting about this to me was how it ends. Like, I don't want to spoil anything about it, but it has this ending that, like, I think a lot of YA dystopian kind of ends in this sort of like revolution, you know, overthrow the government kind of ending, and this one really doesn't. It's much more about like surviving, but it has this ending that is like both kind of hopeful and hopeless in a way. But I just thought this was really good, and I give it 4 stars. Then I read The Fourth Island by Sarah Tolmie. This is a little novella that is historical fantasy, which is about a fourth Aran island. So it is this magical island that you can only find if you have experienced like a moment of deep despair. And so it is the island of the lost. It is this place where people who have been lost in history, in time, in, you know, their own lives appear and make a new life for themselves. And so we start out on a regular island where a body washes ashore with a sweater that has a pattern in it that nobody recognizes, because usually like fishermen's sweaters have patterns that are knitted by like women in their family, and there's specific patterns you can recognize, like, oh, this is the pattern of this family. So it is a sweater that nobody recognizes. They don't know where this body came from. And so then we're following some of the people on that island as they eventually experience moments of despair that bring them to this fourth island, and the lives that they create for themselves there, and how they kind of restart their lives on this island, and then how the other like regular island people are kind of struggling. This book, I'm not sure how to feel about this one, because it had some interesting ideas to it. I think that it had like strong atmosphere to it, because it definitely had this kind of like cold island feeling. But I also a little bit was like, I'm not sure what the point of it was. I think maybe it just like went past me. Like I'm not sure I really enjoyed this, but I don't necessarily think it's because it wasn't like good. I think something about kind of what the intention of the story just like passed me by, and I just like didn't quite grasp it. Yeah, so I gave this 3 stars because I just like I didn't love it that much, but I wasn't quite sure why. Then I read Hall of Smoke by H.M. Long. Everybody read this on my Discord. This is the first book in the Hall of Smoke duology. Is that what the duology is called? I'm not really sure, but there is a second book coming out. Anyway, this is sort of a Norse-inspired fantasy where we are following a priestess of the goddess of war. So she is this like warrior priestess, and at the beginning of the book she's kind of in disgrace among her people because she failed to kill a man that she was supposed to. Her goddess had sent her a vision telling her to kill a specific man when she encountered him. She did not kill him, and so she's in disgrace. She's been sent up a mountain to repent, and while she is up there, invaders come and just kill everybody in her temple and the surrounding village, and by the time she gets down there, pretty much everybody is dead or dying. She ends up being taken as a slave, which she eventually escapes, but her goddess visits her and essentially says, like, you still have to kill this guy, and she does not like know why. Her goddess won't tell her, and so we're following her as she is on this journey trying to track down this man that she is meant to kill. However, along the way, we keep finding out more and more questions about, like, not just like who is this man and why does she have to kill him, but also like the nature of gods, because there is clearly something going on among the gods. Her goddess is strangely absent, and so she's trying to figure out, like, where has she gone? Is something wrong? There are some people who are indicating that like maybe the gods are not even actually gods. There's just like so many questions that she's trying to figure out while she is navigating through these countries where these like hostile countries, because pretty much all of her people are being wiped out by these invaders, and so there are just like people on all sides that she cannot trust. For the first time in her life, she is completely alone because she cannot find any of her own people. And so she's like struggling to survive and trying to figure out how to help, like what's happening with the gods, how to help them, and then also trying to track down this man to kill. Anyway, that I feel like was maybe a very convoluted explanation of what the book was about. But while I was reading it, like this book just ends up with like, there are so many questions about what's going on with the gods and in this world. And so that's why the way I was trying, like the way I'm describing it might be kind of convoluted, but for most of the book, we just have so many questions really without any answers. And that was something that I kind of liked and didn't like about it, because I thought the world was really interesting. I liked our main character, Hessa, and a lot of the mystery elements to it that we had about like what is the nature of godhood, and you know, who are truly gods and which gods are like better, and what's happening to them, and just all of these questions. It was all very interesting and I really enjoyed those elements of it. However, I reached a point with this where it just felt like we kept getting more and more questions with no answers. So I just kind of was like, where is this book going? Even though like it felt like we didn't make progress, even though lots of things were happening. I also had a little bit of a hard time with the fact that there's large periods of the book where Hessa is pretty much completely alone or only surrounded by enemies, which I just personally, I just like don't always find those points in books as interesting, because I really like character interaction and dynamics, and so it's very hard to sell me on like super solitary stories, unless like it can happen. I've encountered stories where it worked, but like the you know, narration of those characters, like you have to have a really strong character in order for that to work. And while I liked Hessa a lot, I just like was not as engaged, because I was kind of missing other like character dynamics and connections. I did like that there were parts where you could really feel like her depth of loneliness. I kind of wish it had leaned into that a little bit more, because I think that would have been interesting. And even if she was alone, if you had really gone on this like emotional journey with her, with this like, you know, internal turmoil, that would have been very interesting to me. And we got a little bit of it. I just wanted more. But overall, I did like this. I think that it was very interesting. I think that for me there were just some issues with like pacing and how much information we did or did not have, because there was just, as I said, a long period where I was like, I'm only getting questions, no answers. And then towards the end, there were just periods of like exposition to explain everything or like give the answers. And while I wanted those answers, I was like, this is not my favorite way of receiving them. But this is a debut, I believe, and so there's enough about this that I enjoyed and was really interesting to me that I will continue to, you know, see what this author puts out. I'm planning to read the second book in the series, but just like there were a couple things that like didn't quite work for me, but as a debut, I think it was pretty good, and I gave this 4 stars. All right, and then my last books that I read were the final 2 books in the Rainwild Chronicles. I listened to these as audiobooks, so they are City of Dragons and Blood of Dragons. So I'm so excited that I finished this series. And I finished the entire quartet in 2 months, which for me is like record-breaking speed for reading a Robin Hobb book, because usually it takes me like at least a year to read one of her series. Okay, so I really can't say too much about this because this is like so far into the series, but these are the 3rd and 4th book in the Rainwild Chronicles. We are following again the dragon keepers and the dragons as they are settling the dragons into a new location, and people are kind of finding like what are their roles going to be, who are they going to be in this sort of new colony of dragons and dragon keepers. What can I say about this? I mean, overall, I really enjoyed this. I think I enjoyed the first 2 books more than the second 2 books. once again, I do feel like these two are essentially like one book, because I had very little to say about City of Dragons, because it kind of just felt like the first half of a book, and then it sort of, you know, came to fruition in the second half. So like the first two, I would recommend just kind of reading these two back to back as if they were one book. But what else? There were some there's some, you know, good character development, character relationships that we get to see how those wrap up in the end of this series. There was a character confrontation that I had been like waiting for, which was very, I think it was well done. I was glad the way it happened. I think my only real like issue with this was that in these two books, she like really overuses the word furious and fury. And usually when I'm reading a Robin Hobb book, I have zero complaints about her writing. Excellent writing, right? This is the one time where I just was like, pick a different word. Like, it was pretty much the only word that you'd use to describe like the emotions of the dragons. It was just so much, and it got very annoying. And I was just like, you need to find some word other than fury. But other than that, these were great. I gave the first one 3.5 stars and the second one 4 stars, and I'm very glad to have finished that series. Okay, so those are all the books that I read in December. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!